The midday sun blazed overhead as the bustling streets of Atlanta hummed with activity. Amid the chaos of a busy intersection, the sound of screeching tires pierced the air, followed by the sharp bark of a commanding voice. "Step out of the car. Now." Tamara Williams, a 32-year-old black woman dressed in a professional blazer and slacks, froze in place. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she stared at the uniformed officer standing beside her car, his hand hovering over the holster of his gun. Fear churned in her stomach, but she maintained her composure. "Officer, what's this about?" Tamara asked, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "You know exactly what this is about," the cop snapped, his tone dripping with hostility. "License and registration." "Move it." Tamara complied, her movements slow and deliberate. She handed him the documents, her heart racing. She knew she had done nothing wrong. She had come to this neighborhood for a quick meeting with a client before heading home to her husband, but now she found herself in a situation she had feared her entire life. The officer, whose name tag read Officer Daniels, scanned her paperwork with a scowl. "Suspicious behavior," he muttered. "Driving in this area with tinted windows? Smells like trouble to me." "Suspicious behavior?" Tamara repeated, her voice rising slightly. "I'm a consultant. I had a meeting down the street. You can check my calendar." "Don't get smart with me," Daniels interrupted, his voice cold. "Step out of the vehicle." Tamara hesitated. A small crowd had started to gather, their murmurs growing louder. She could feel their eyes on her, a mix of concern and morbid curiosity. She glanced at her phone on the passenger seat, debating whether to call her husband. "Step out now," Daniels barked again, his hand inching toward his holster. Swallowing her fear, Tamara opened the door and stepped out, her hands raised slightly. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've done nothing wrong." "You people always have excuses," Daniels sneered, motioning for her to turn around. "Hands on the car." The word stung. "You people." The phrase carried the weight of generations of prejudice and dehumanization. Tamara felt anger rising within her, but she held it back. This wasn't the time to lose control. As Daniels began to pat her down, Tamara caught sight of a man pushing through the crowd, a tall, well-dressed black man with an air of authority. Her heart leapt. It was Marcus, her husband. "Tamara," Marcus called out, his deep voice commanding attention. "What's going on here?" Daniels glanced at Marcus but didn't respond. "Stay back," he ordered. Marcus ignored him, pulling out his phone to record the interaction. "Officer, on what grounds are you detaining my wife?" Daniels scoffed, his arrogance unshaken. "She's acting suspicious." "That's all the grounds I need." "Suspicious? For driving while black?" Marcus shot back, his voice steady but laced with anger. "Do you even know who you're dealing with?" Daniels narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "I don't care who you are. She's coming with me." Tamara locked eyes with Marcus, silently pleading for him to stay calm. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He stepped closer, his presence commanding attention. "You're making a big mistake, Officer Daniels," Marcus said, his voice low and firm. "A very big mistake." Daniels hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But before he could respond, the sound of another car pulling up filled the air. A black SUV came to a stop, and two men in suits stepped out, their expressions grim. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, his tone authoritative. Daniels straightened, his confidence faltering. "Who are you?" The man pulled out a badge, his voice calm but deadly serious. "FBI." Tamara's breath caught in her throat. The crowd gasped, their murmurs growing louder. Marcus folded his arms, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Let's just say," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on Daniels, "you picked the wrong family to mess with." The air grew tense as Officer Daniels stood frozen, his eyes darting between the FBI agents, Tamara, and Marcus. His confidence, the smug sense of superiority he carried moments ago, was quickly unraveling. "What's going on here?" Daniels asked, his voice wavering slightly. The lead FBI agent, a tall man with a clean-cut appearance, stepped forward. "Officer Daniels, We've been monitoring reports of racial profiling and misuse of authority in this precinct. Your actions today fit a troubling pattern. Daniels stiffened, his jaw clenching. I was doing my job, he snapped. She was acting suspicious. Suspicious how? Marcus interjected, his tone sharp. By existing? By driving while black? Or by simply being in a neighborhood you don't think she belongs in? Daniels shot him a glare but didn't respond. The crowd had grown larger now, with several people recording on their phones. Whispers spread like wildfire. This isn't the first time, is it? Marcus continued, stepping closer to Daniels. How many others have you stopped like this? How many people have you humiliated, intimidated, or wrongfully detained just because you think you can? Tamara, still standing by the car, finally found her voice. He pulled me over without cause, she said, addressing the agents. He didn't even tell me why until he decided I looked suspicious. The lead agent nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned back to Daniels. You're not obligated to answer, but I suggest you think carefully about your next words. We've already gathered substantial evidence about your conduct. This incident could be the tipping point. Daniels' face reddened. I didn't do anything wrong, he insisted. This is just another case of people blowing things out of proportion. You don't know what it's like out here. What it's like? Marcus echoed, his voice rising. You mean what it's like to be black in America? To be judged, harassed, and dehumanized because of the color of your skin? Trust me, officer. We know exactly what it's like. Tamara felt a swell of pride watching her husband stand his ground. Marcus wasn't just a supportive spouse. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who refused to let injustice go unchallenged. But Daniels wasn't done. Look, I was following protocol, he said, his voice defensive. If she didn't want trouble, she should have complied without attitude. You people always make things harder than they need to be. There it was again. You people. The phrase cut through the air like a blade, drawing audible gasps from the crowd. Marcus took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. Your ignorance is astounding, he said, his voice low but steady. But today, your ignorance has consequences. The FBI agent gestured to Daniels. We'll take it from here. Hand over your badge and weapon. What? Daniels' voice cracked. You can't do this. We can, and we will. The agent replied firmly. Your actions have been reported and documented multiple times. This stops now. As Daniels reluctantly handed over his badge, Tamara felt a wave of relief. But beneath it was a lingering frustration, a reminder that Daniels was just one man in a much larger system. Later that evening, Tamara and Marcus sat in their living room, the day's events replaying in their minds. Marcus was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor. What's on your mind? Tamara asked gently. Marcus looked up, his expression thoughtful. This isn't just about Daniels, he said. He's a symptom of a deeper problem. A system that enables people like him to act with impunity. Tamara nodded. It's exhausting, she admitted. Living with the constant fear that no matter how careful we are, we'll still be targeted. Marcus reached for her hand. I know, but we can't let this break us. We have a platform, Tamara. We can turn this into something bigger, something that makes a difference. She squeezed his hand, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. You're right. It's time we did something. The conversation drifted into a shared resolve, their frustration transforming into determination. They began drafting ideas for a public statement, brainstorming ways to raise awareness and demand accountability. Meanwhile, Daniels sat alone in a dimly lit precinct office, his badge and weapon gone. His superiors had placed him on suspension, pending a full investigation. He stared at the wall, his mind racing. For the first time, he was forced to confront the possibility that he was part of the problem, an uncomfortable realization he wasn't ready to accept. But the evidence against him was mounting, and the days of hiding behind a badge were coming to an end. In the days following the incident, Tamara and Marcus took their story public. A clip of Marcus confronting Officer Daniels had gone viral on social media, sparking outrage and solidarity. The hashtag Justice for Tamara trended within hours, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of racial profiling. This isn't just about me, Tamara said during a live interview with a local news channel. Sitting beside Marcus, she exuded calm strength. This is about every black person who has been judged, harassed, or criminalized simply for existing. It's about holding people accountable, both individuals and the systems that protect them. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly moved by her words. And what do you hope to achieve from sharing your story? We want change, Marcus answered firmly. We're calling for transparency in police conduct, mandatory racial bias training, and an independent review board to investigate complaints of misconduct. This isn't just about awareness, it's about action. As the interview aired, the momentum continued to build. Community leaders, activists, and even celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying their message. The Williamses found themselves at the center of a growing movement, their voices carrying the weight of countless others who had been silenced. The FBI agents who had intervened during Tamara's arrest were now leading the inquiry. They uncovered a troubling pattern in Daniel's record. Over a dozen complaints of racial bias, excessive force, and wrongful arrests, all of which had been quietly dismissed by his precinct. This guy's a walking liability, one of the agents muttered, flipping through a thick stack of reports. How has he stayed on the force this long? Protective culture, his partner replied. The precinct's been covering for him, but not anymore. We've got enough here to build a solid case. The agents also reviewed body cam footage from Daniel's arrest of Tamara. The footage showed his aggressive tone, his dismissive remarks, and his refusal to provide a clear reason for the stop. It painted a damning picture of a man abusing his power. But the most compelling evidence came from the crowd that had gathered that day. Dozens of bystanders had recorded the incident, and their videos provided multiple angles of what happened. Several witnesses came forward to testify, including a woman who revealed that Daniels had harassed her son just weeks earlier. This has been going on for years, the woman said during a public forum. He's gotten away with it because no one's held him accountable. But now, thanks to Tamara and Marcus, we finally have a chance to stop him. While the investigation unfolded, Tamara and Marcus worked tirelessly to push for systemic change. They organized town hall meetings, where community members shared their stories and proposed solutions. During one particularly emotional meeting, an elderly man stood up, his voice trembling with anger. I've lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, he said, and I've seen good officers and bad ones. But it's the bad ones who make us afraid. We need to clean house, start fresh with people who respect the communities they serve. The room erupted in applause, a collective expression of frustration and hope. Marcus nodded. This is why we're here, he said. Not just to expose one bad cop, but to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they're supposed to protect. It won't happen overnight, but it starts with accountability. Weeks later, the Williamses received a call from the FBI. The agent on the other end sounded serious. Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, we've uncovered something you need to know. What is it? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. The agent hesitated before replying. There's evidence that Officer Daniels was part of a group within the precinct, a small but influential clique that shared racist ideologies and targeted minority communities. They operated under the radar, covering for each other to avoid consequences. Daniels wasn't just acting alone. He was part of a system within a system. Tamara's breath caught. You're saying this goes deeper than just him? Exactly, the agent confirmed. But thanks to your case, we have the leverage to expose the entire operation. Your courage has set off a chain reaction, and we're getting closer to dismantling this network. The revelation left Tamara and Marcus stunned. They had always known the problem was systemic, but hearing it confirmed added a new layer of gravity to their mission. We'll do whatever it takes to help, Marcus said after a moment. This needs to end. As the investigation deepened, the FBI raided the precinct, seizing documents, emails, and internal communications that revealed the extent of the misconduct. Several officers were implicated, and the chief of police was forced to step down amid mounting pressure. The community watched in shock as the truth came to light. For years, this precinct had operated under a culture of corruption and prejudice. But now, the walls of silence were finally crumbling. For Tamara and Marcus, it was a bittersweet victory. They had set out to demand accountability for one officer's actions, But their fight had uncovered something far larger and far uglier than they had imagined. The raid on the precinct was a turning point, not just for Tamara and Marcus, but for the entire community. News outlets across the country reported on the findings: a toxic culture of racial bias, cover-ups, and abuse of power that had persisted for years. The revelations were met with widespread outrage, fueling protests and calls for systemic reform. For the Williamses, the victory felt significant but incomplete. Exposing the problem is only half the battle, Marcus said during another live interview. The real work begins now, rebuilding a system that protects and serves everyone equally, without prejudice or fear. Motivated by their growing platform, Tamara and Marcus partnered with local activists to launch a campaign called Justice in Action, aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. The campaign focused on 3 key areas: advocating for independent oversight boards to review complaints of police misconduct, mandating racial bias training and community engagement programs for officers, pushing for laws that limit qualified immunity and require the use of body cameras in all interactions. To kick off the campaign, they organized a rally in the heart of Atlanta. Thousands of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "End Police Bias Now." Tamara stood at the podium, her voice ringing with conviction. This isn't just about one precinct or one officer. This is about dismantling a system that devalues Black lives and building one that upholds justice for everyone. We have the power to make change. Right here, right now. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the streets. For the first time in weeks, Tamara felt a glimmer of hope. As pressure mounted, city officials were forced to take action. The mayor announced a series of reforms, starting with the immediate implementation of body cameras for all officers and the creation of a civilian review board to oversee complaints. "We hear you," the mayor said during a press conference. The voices of this community have made it clear that change is not optional. It's essential. At the state level, legislators introduced a bill inspired by the Justice in Action campaign, calling for stricter oversight of police departments and increased funding for community-based initiatives. The bill, unofficially dubbed Tamara's Law, quickly gained bipartisan support. For Tamara and Marcus, seeing their advocacy translate into tangible change was both humbling and empowering. "This is what happens when people come together and refuse to be silent," Marcus said during a televised interview. "It's proof that our voices matter." Amid the whirlwind of activism, Tamara and Marcus also found themselves navigating their own journey of healing. The trauma of the arrest and the public scrutiny that followed had taken a toll, but their shared purpose kept them grounded. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to Tamara with a soft smile. "You know, I'm proud of you," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "Me? You're the one who stood up to Daniels and started this whole movement." "We both did," Marcus replied. "But it was your courage that inspired me. You didn't let fear stop you that day, and you haven't let it stop you since." Tamara felt tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "We're stronger together." Their hands intertwined, a silent promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. As news of the reforms spread, other communities began to take action. Cities across the country launched their own investigations into police misconduct, and similar campaigns emerged, inspired by the Justice in Action movement. 1 year after the incident, Tamara and Marcus were invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. Standing before a packed audience, Tamara reflected on the journey that had brought them there. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice steady. "It's just the beginning. The fight for justice is ongoing, and it requires all of us to stay engaged, to hold each other accountable, and to never lose hope. Together, we can create a better future, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come." The audience rose to their feet, applauding with a fervor that filled the room. Tamara and Marcus exchanged a glance, their hearts full of gratitude and resolve. 1 year turned into 2, and the effects of Tamara and Marcus's fight for justice continued to unfold. The reforms enacted in their city set a precedent, sparking a wave of change across the nation. Community oversight boards, mandatory bias training, and stricter accountability measures became standard practices in many jurisdictions. The Justice in Action campaign evolved into a national organization with chapters in cities across the country. Tamara and Marcus worked tirelessly to expand its reach, speaking at conferences, organizing workshops, and meeting with lawmakers to advocate for further policy changes. But their fight wasn't without challenges. Opponents of the movement pushed back, arguing that increased oversight made policing more difficult. Some officers resisted the new training programs, and lawsuits were filed to challenge the reforms. Tamara addressed these challenges head-on during an interview on a national news program. "Change is never easy," she said. "It's uncomfortable, and it forces us to confront truths we'd rather ignore. But discomfort is necessary for growth. We're not just fighting for justice, we're fighting for a better future for everyone." Amid the whirlwind of activism, Tamara and Marcus found moments to reflect on how far they had come. Sitting in their living room one evening, surrounded by letters of support from people across the country, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "Do you ever think about that day?" Marcus asked, his voice soft. "All the time," Tamara admitted. "It was the worst day of my life, but in some ways, it was also the most important. It forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. And it showed me how much we can accomplish when we stand together." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "I think about what would have happened if we hadn't spoken up. If we just let it go. None of this would exist." Tamara smiled. "We made a choice," she said, "and that choice made all the difference." In their hometown, the changes were palpable. The once distrustful relationship between the police and the community began to heal. Officers attended community events, met with residents to listen to their concerns, and worked to rebuild trust. One afternoon, Tamara was approached by a young girl at a community event. "Mrs. Williams?" the girl said shyly. "Yes, sweetheart," Tamara replied, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "I just wanted to say thank you," the girl said. "Because of you, my mom says she doesn't feel scared anymore." Tamara felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged the girl. Moments like this reminded her why they had fought so hard. As the years passed, Tamara and Marcus became symbols of resilience and hope. Their story was taught in schools as an example of how ordinary people could spark extraordinary change. One day, Tamara stood in a lecture hall at a university, speaking to a room full of students. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm just a person who refused to stay silent. The real heroes are all of you. The people who carry this fight forward, who refuse to accept injustice as the status quo. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because of all of us, working together." The students gave her a standing ovation, their faces filled with determination. As Tamara and Marcus drove home that evening, the city lights sparkling in the distance, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "We've come so far," Marcus said, his voice tinged with awe. "And there's still so much to do," Tamara replied. "But we'll do it," Marcus said, taking her hand. Together, Tamara squeezed his hand, a smile spreading across her face. Always, they drove on, their hearts full of hope and determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.